Welcome to Maidens and Magic. All right, witches, hello again. You are down with me, Anarchy. I am here to bring you this week's episode of Maidens and Magic. I do realize, this week's episode, I'll just say up front, of course, if you haven't heard, is Dario Argento's original version of Suspiria. That's the 1977 Italian supernatural horror film. So you are in store for a big treat there. We have a few maidens to talk about, and then we're going to get into the idea. This week's magic will actually be about the idea of a coven or Coventry. Where did it start? How did it become popular? What really does it mean to be in a coven? These are interesting questions that I hope to answer. These and more. I do realize, as I was saying, that I missed my self-imposed drop date of Friday. To be honest, I had had 1 hour of sleep the night before, and needless to say, Friday got away from me. I have unfortunately had another friend. She's a warrioress, she's fierce, and she is going to be amazing. She's going to phoenix from a flame this whole damn thing. But I have to say, breast cancer has become ridiculously prevalent in my immediate community. And I mean, dear friends of mine, I'm really done. I'm hoping this is the last of it, and we can all move on into the next phase of our witchiness together, I guess. Well, dubiously and probably a little bit reluctantly approaching the crone-dom, but here we go. It happens to everybody. I guess technically we're in cronehood now, and I bypassed the mother phase, as many of you knows that was never happening for me. Never, never. All right. So without further ado, as I like to say so much, Maidens and Magic is going to launch right into the maiden portion of Suspiria. We really do have a bevy of beauties is literally something they used to say in the strip clubs in Seattle. God, how do I know that? I don't know. I heard it from a friend or two. All right. Anyway, going into this, it's very interesting. I found out a lot of things that I did not know. I was thinking about Jessica Harper because she's the obvious lead in many ways although it really is kind of an ensemble cast. Jessica Harper is the lead. But I found out while looking at this that Daria Nicolodi, I guess we'd say. It's probably not the best pronunciation. Nickelodeon. That is not her name. She was actually married to Dario Argento, which I did not know. And well, I don't know if they were actually married, but they were partnered for quite some time. And she is Asia Argento's mother. If you look at her, you can definitely see the resemblance. The genes are strong in this one. Also interesting about this, she actually co-wrote this movie with Dario. So I think that's that whole creative, being able to project like that creatively with a partner is really intense and fascinating. When it works fan-fucking-tastically, but man, most of the time it does not. So this case, it did. Lucky for us. She was going to star in the movie. I'm not sure which, probably in the lead role she was going to star, but at the last minute, I guess she got an injury. And oh no, because she was replaced by Stephanie Cassini. What part did Stephanie Cassini play? Not sure, but man, is she gorgeous. Sorry, slightly distracted there. Sorry, witches. Yeah, no, she's foxy. Don't know. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole anyway. But I did want to talk a little bit about. I'll go through briefly go through Jessica Harper because I actually have the least. She actually had the most normal kind of, or who can say normal? I don't know. Strike that. Let's just say the least eventful life, at least on paper. So getting into Jessica Harper seems to have led a fairly provincial life. I don't know, at least by my comparison. So, take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, she was born, I think she was born in Chicago. And she was in. You guys might remember there was a not a fall. I was going to say a remake, a follow up to the Rocky Horror Picture Show called Shock Treatment, which was made in 1981. And while it was a very different movie in a lot of ways than the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because the Rocky Horror Picture Show is a complete genius standalone that has never really been replicated, nor has anyone tried. Not really. I don't know. Argue me on, fight me on that. But at any rate, yes, she was in that. And yes, she was born in Chicago. There's nothing really. She had a pretty, straightforward life and career. Really, she was in more than 20 motion pictures. Um, She's worked with Steve Martin and Bernadette Peters, and yeah, a lot of stuff I've not seen or never heard of. It looks like she was partnered with a guy, Thomas Edgar Rothman, for a long time. And I guess the one kind of thing about her that, yeah, anyway, that this would be a nightmare for me. I honestly, it sounds like a fucking nightmare. She has suffered for 15 years now from a neovascular degeneration, and she has to receive injections in her eyeballs, in her eyes, every 6 weeks. I can't imagine that that would be a lot of fun. My sympathies to her, but yeah, I didn't see any other. There's just really not. Her Wikipedia page is basically her filmography, which again, more than 20 films. You can look those up. There weren't a lot that I was familiar with. Suffice to say, she does an amazing job in Suspiria as this young ingenue, which we will talk about. She really plays the role well. Okay, so I want to get to somebody else in the film. I want to get to, there's two other people in the film that I wanted to talk about. One is Joan Bennett. I think that's probably pronounced Bennett and not Benet. I have never heard her name pronounced, so forgive me if I'm doing that incorrectly. Anyway, she's somebody that you might want to uh, Google and take a look at. If you're a fan of these old timey actresses, like she is compared directly to Hedy Lamarr. So if you know who that is and what she looks like. She was also actually in the original. I'm having some talking issues today. That's okay. I'm going to keep going because we all make little mistakes sometimes, and that is okay. That's part of life. She was in the original Woman in the Window in 1944, and also in the 1960s soap opera Dark Shadows, which maybe you're familiar with. The later movie version of that starring Johnny Depp was that Tim Burton too? No, that can't have been. I'm not going to look it up. If you want to look it up, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. It's tempting, but yeah, she had a pretty interesting career. She was in a lot of films with a lot of other famous people, and she competed directly with Katharine Hepburn in Little Women. She was kind of a heavy hitter enough that I'm really surprised that I'm not more familiar with her or her work. And now the scandal. What you've really all waited for, why you really all came here, but what are the scandals? I seem to always uncover these scandals with the maidens, and it's bizarre to me. Yeah, there was a whole thing with Veronica Lake, and then the Catherine Deneuve problem, and I'm not quite sure now what is going on with Miss Sherilyn Fenn. But at any rate, turns out for 12 years, Joan Bennett had been represented by this agent named Jennings Lang. And at any rate, whether or not they were actually having an affair, it doesn't seem to be that they were. However, her husband thought so. So her husband, Walter Wagner, who was probably some actor or something, I don't really know. I'm not here for all the facts. I'm just giving you the hot goss. So anyway, he saw them together in the car. She was parked. This was in broad daylight, right? Just in were they in Santa Monica Boulevard? Okay, so right out in the middle of the middle of the road, like in plain sight is my point. 2:30 p.m. broad daylight. He sees them together talking. In a fit of jealousy, goes up, boom, boom, shoots. Wagner shoots fucking Lang twice in the back, kills him dead. Yeah, and he said I shot him because I thought he was breaking up my home. That's what he told the police in Beverly Hills. And eventually he kind of got off on temporary insanity. I don't know exactly what the sentencing was like, but I think he got off pretty easily. Oops. Well, actually, now that I'm reading this a little more closely, I can tell you he probably got off because it turns out Lang made a recovery in the hospital. There you go. All right. Well, good for him. And that's pretty much all I wanted to say about Joan Bennett. That is kind of like Joan Bennett, Joan Bennett Ramsey. Okay. Um, at any rate, I'm going to move on to the next person, the next actress in the film, or goddess, or maiden, rather, that I wanted to tell you about. I said goddess because I'm looking at photos of her right now, and meow. Okay, Alida Valli, and she was in the 20s widely regarded as the most beautiful woman in the world. That might be a little bit superfluous, but well, who knows? She, she's pretty gorgeous. You can look her up. Her name is Alida Valli, Valli. She was, well, actually, sorry, can I please tell you her whole name? Her full name is Baroness Alida Maria Laura Attenberger von Markenstein Frauenberg. That is her entire title, if you will. Unfortunately, people simply call her Valli. Okay. Not surprisingly, with a title like that, it seems she grew up in a pretty bougie lifestyle. I think she was related to a Roman senator, so it seemed like they had kind of a culturally sophisticated lifestyle going on there. I read a little bit about her personal life. She was married to an acrobatic pilot. He was a fighter pilot, and I think they had some kids. I don't usually give a fuck about kids, I have to say. But here's what I do care about. Well, let me look at her IMDb. Is not super long, just to tell you. Oh, actually, it is longer than I thought. Oh dear. Oh my, it is. Okay, she's been in a ton of stuff. So go ahead, Google her, check that out if you want to. She's been in some things that look interesting. But here's what I want to talk about again. Dun dun. The scandal, darling. The scandal. Okay, this one is weird and it's a bit circuitous. I clicked on the link and it didn't feel about like doing exhaustive amounts of research, but I'm going to give you the skinny on this one. She was in 1953, and her career suffered from this. She was involved in a scandal surrounding the death of Wilma Montesi, whose body was found on a public beach near Ostia. Prolonged investigations resulted involving allegations of drug and sex orgies in Roman society. Mm-hmm. You heard that right. Drug and sex orgies in the Roman society. All of these people accused of being involved with it were acquitted, but I'm not really entirely sure. It's dubious. I don't really know. That's the second time I've used the word dubious this podcast. What is my subconscious mind trying to tell me? I'm not really sure what anyone was accused of specifically. When you click on this, it's on the link for William Montesi. It kind of takes you in a circle and it doesn't give a lot of additional information, or it's I'm going to say this, it's a poorly written Wikipedia page. Yeah, it's Wikipedia. It did say that, let's see, her body was found lying on its back on the shore, the head immersed in water, and she was partially dressed. But so it turns out she was no longer wearing her shoes, her skirt, her stockings, or her garter belt, and her handbag was missing. But still, they didn't really suspect, or they didn't at all suspect any kind of sexual misconduct or foul play, assault, or anything. In fact, she was still a virgin, which doesn't really fit in with the whole like drug and sex orgy kind of thing. So was she like an incidental victim, or was she some kind of like collateral damage in something larger? Nobody really knows. There's a little bit more of a story about it, but it doesn't really explain a lot more. And again, I did not feel like doing a deep dive. I just thought it was very interesting that the what they didn't find any drugs or alcohol in her body, and but there was sand in her intimate parts, and so they thought there might be violence, but again, no rape, no sexual trauma, nothing like that. But what was interesting was their theory about what happened was that her probable okay, this is really one of those things where, oh, the frailty of the feminine species, right? There's so men thought back then. The cause of death was a syncope due to a foot bath. So, in other words, she stripped off her pantyhose and shoes and so forth because this darn foot of hers was bothering her. And so she went into the sea to like soak her feet a little bit. And then because she somehow, it just says where she fainted and finally drowned. And this was probably because she was menstruating. I mean, I don't know, dude. On the other hand, I've had some fucking wretched periods, and yeah, I've nearly fainted from pain. So maybe it is possible. Maybe she had endometriosis. Who knows? But anyway, she was on her period. So she fell into the sea and drowned, as women do, as happens on occasion. Yes, so I thought that was a little too. So we had two kind of scandals there. We had my husband shot my fucking agent of 15 years, who I swear I wasn't having an affair with, and this mysterious tie. And here's the other thing: I do not know. It is not at all clear how Villa, or what are we calling her, Valli, Alida Valli, figured at all into this suspicious death. At no point do they make that clear. But there it was. It was a tie. No matter how third time dubious. All right. Next, we are going to go into the magic. And actually, I'm going to do the movie first. I think we're probably going to sequence it so a description of the movie is next, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm going to do the movie very, very briefly. I'm not doing a scene by scene. I'm just capturing the essence because I really, really encourage you to watch it on your own. And then we will go into the magic. All right. Now, as a special treat, while I am recording this portion of the show, I want to play some of Goblin's Suspiria. This is the soundtrack from the Suspiria theme. This is a Suspiria theme here that you're going to be hearing during the course of this 1977 movie by Dario Argento, Suspiria. Gosh, it is such a beautiful movie. I hope you can hear that eerie motherfucking whispering. It just unhinges me a little bit. Just a little bit. Okay, so this whole movie is when Jessica Harper, who plays Susie Bennion, she's this American ingenue. She's a ballet dancer. She's going from where the fuck ever in America, who cares? Anywhere USA. She's going to Baden-Württemberg. It's actually Freiburg, where my friend Dharma went to school and where I stayed with her. We jumped off from there and did a lot of traveling. So I actually have very fond memories of Freiburg and the Stussy parties there. At any rate, that's just me. So she goes there she gets to this conservatory, which is, by the way, like a haunted fucking castle. Okay, it just couldn't be more like a haunted Gothic castle. And it's like pouring rain. There's this like brilliant thunderstorm. It seems insane. Well, as she gets there, there's a woman running away. And I think that woman is Pat Hingle. Okay, so she's like screaming and she's fleeing the school in terror. And Susie's like, what the fuck? I don't know. And she's like, well, that's kind of weird. But anyway, Pat is ambushed by shadowy figures. This is one of the first and like most gruesome and darkest scenes, right? This is in the first, few minutes of the movie, really, where Pat is ambushed by a shadowy figure who stabs her repeatedly and then like drags her up to the roof of the apartment building and hangs her with a noose by throwing her through the building's skylight, which is beautifully filmed, I want to say. I just have to say. So anyway, Susie basically what's going on is there's another girl there named Sarah who's kind of like trying to befriend Susie a little bit. She's like, yeah, I something is going on here. Something is not right. Pat was not crazy. She was running from something. She's been leaving me clues. I found a note. There's some shit going on here. And so Susie and Sarah start to embark on this kind of Scooby-Doo mystery of like trying to get to the bottom of like a bunch of weird shit's going on. I mean, there are like people that are missing and then they're not. And then there's a distinctly odd behavior of the head mistress, Mrs. Tanner. Or no, sorry, the head instructor, which is which? There's two. There's Mrs. Tanner and then there's Madame Blanc. They're like the two head ladies. And so, anyways, they've got a lot of weird shit going on. And I'm trying to remember some of sequentially some of the things that happen, but there's also this blind. I mean, as there weren't enough odd kind of eerie, off-putting characters, but no, not quite enough. You know what else we need? We need a blind pianist. We need a blind guy on the piano right now. So this happens. This guy's name is Daniel, and he's weird, and he's got this German Shepherd who's strangely aggressive, and there's a kind of a scene with the German Shepherd, though, that is actually quite unnerving. And if you have any fear of dogs, you probably don't want to watch this scene in particular, because this dog turns and rips this guy's throat out. I mean, it's just very, very gory. What else? Anyway, so yeah, they all realize now that, well, no, they don't all realize. That's the thing, is the girls are strangely, they're clearly afraid. Some of them seem kind of in a trance or entranced, and others of them seem kind of afraid. But at some point, let's see, Susie goes away. I mean, sorry, not Susie. Sarah, the friend who said, Pat's not crazy, something's fucking up here, y'all. It's not right. Sarah disappears, and Susie goes off to investigate her disappearance the next morning. She's like, okay, what's going on? Now, unbeknownst to her, Sarah is not so much alive anymore. Now, due to some extreme malfeasance and witchery here, poor Sarah has in fact found herself pushed rather psychically, into a bit of razor wire. So she's bloody dead. Bloody goddamn dead. Just dead. All right. So then, anyway, sorry, Susie doesn't know where she is. She goes to find her. She ends up meeting this Sarah's friend. Susie meets Sarah's friend and former psychiatrist, Frank Mandel. And he's like, that school was established by this Greek woman, an immigrant, Helena Marcos, and she was allegedly a witch. And Susie's got all these questions. He's like, let me refer you to my friend. He's a professor of the occult. Of course he is. Professor Milius or whatever. And this guy says, you know what? And here he reveals a rather popular movie trope. You've all heard it or seen it played out. There's this idea that there's a coven of witches, that they will perish. The whole coven will die. They will cease to exist without their leader from whom they draw power. So you kill the head witch, the coven dies with it. Okay, right. So Susie comes back. She's left she realizes, she gets back to the creepy mansion's conservatory. She's like, shit, they're all at the Bolshoi Ballet. What's going on? And there's not really anybody there. So she's like, I starts hearing weird sounds, and she remembers that Sarah had talked about these weird sounds, and she follows them into a secret room and realizes there that Madame Blanc is plotting her demise in the form of a human sacrifice. All right, so she realizes that she's about to be sacrificed, so she runs away, and then she finds this Helena Marcos's bedroom, and she finds Marcos sleeping, and she's like, oh my god, this is a head witch. If I do this thing, I cut this up, the whole coven dies. Ta-da, freedom, we're all saved. But she accidentally wakes her up by breaking something in an act of like absolute stupid clumsiness. And then there's this whole battle, and Marcos renders herself invisible and taunts Susie by reanimating Sarah's mutilated corpse to murder her. Then flashes of lightning inadvertently reveal Marcos's silhouette, or the woman's silhouette, Marcos's silhouette, and Susie manages to impale her in a bloody, I mean, it like gets her right in the neck, right into the jugular, just blood everywhere, and saves the day. All in all, an absolutely amazing film. I highly encourage you to watch this film. You will not be disappointed if you do. Everybody's heard of a coven. I don't care how vanilla, straight, narrow, whatever you are, Christian, whatever. Everybody has heard of an idea of a coven. There have been movies called The Coven. There's a million movies about witchcraft. It's such a familiar trope. Definitely something even the most straight and narrow among us has heard of. But what really does it mean? And what is a coven? Where did this idea of Coventry come from? Where did it originate? What has popularized it? These are good questions, and questions I'm going to try to answer. So it's starting at the very beginning. Say, for example, you had no real knowledge about what a coven was. I would go, as I did, for the purpose of the show, to the Encyclopedia Britannica, and basically it says, I'm going to do some paraphrasing here. It's a group in which witches are said to gather. So basically, you have like a dazzle of zebras, which are roaming the land free. They have escaped from a private. I don't know who this guy was, but anyway, there's a guy somewhere in Maryland in Prince County who had zebras. They have escaped and have eluded a capture. They have eluded capture. Now we're really rooting for this rogue dazzle. It makes me happy every day. But yes, you have a murder of crows. I like to say a murder of children. People disagree. They find that objectionable, but at any rate, a pack of men or a herd. No, you get the idea. School of fish, so forth. So a coven is really the counting device by which we can count or name a group or a gathering of witches. Well, interestingly, there really was the whole theory of a coven, though, not just as a counting device or a naming device, but this idea of a unit, a witchy unit, was really probably attributed to the English Egyptologist, which, by the way, a fucking degree that fascinates. It pretty much makes me. It turns me on. I'm going to try to be PG-13 here. I am turned on by the idea of an Egyptologist. But anyway, there was one. Her name was Margaret Murray, and really, her idea was that this was from something that she published, that a coven, and I'm going to go ahead and read directly here. A coven is a parody of, it consists of 12 witches and the devil as the leader. Now, this number is generally taken as a parody of Christ and the 12 disciples, and I get that. In fact, I like the little joke. I'm into it. But an alternate theory stresses that Murray, she had this idea that 13 witches was the maximum number of dancers that could be accounted or accommodated in a 9-foot circle. So, before you begin any ritual, like a good witch, you cast your circle, you draw or honor the elements and whatever other deities, spirits, goddesses, whatever. So the elements, water, fire, air, earth, and north, south, east, west. Right? So we've talked about this. You cast a circle of protection, but this is very practical and pragmatic, that only 13 people of what height and weight, I don't know, could fit comfortably.
At any rate, we see this in movies. I did The Craft. I don't remember which episode, but when I did The Craft, we talked about this a little bit. It was a kind of the theme was, what kind of magic is this anyway? What kind of magic is this? And one of the things we noticed was that every woman in The Craft, every girl, really, I guess they were high school girls, represented a different element. And so, yeah, you might have a healer, you might have a visionary, a seer, a magician, you might have any number of things, really. So I like that idea. But we are going to get back to this Egyptologist here, Margaret Murray, in a minute. But let's back it up. Back it up a little bit. Hold on there, don't get carried away. If you've listened to this show even a little bit, you know that I'm old school. I like to take things back, all the way back to medieval times and what I call like medieval Catholicism, which really did have such a fucking son of a bitch of a stranglehold on all of the free world, Western world. Anyway, going all the way back, and I talked about this a little bit more when I did Ken Russell's The Devils. So I encourage you to go back and watch that episode, motherfucker. But what I'm saying right now is I'm going to talk about, I don't know why the sudden burst of hostility. I love you all. I do. But there is this book, it still does exist, that I talk about more in that episode, the Malleus Maleficarum. The Malleus Maleficarum is also known as the Hammer of Witches or the Witch's Hammer. I think we hear that thrown around a little bit more. The Witch's Hammer. Made by a Catholic clergyman, Heinrich Kramer, maybe. I don't know. His Latinized name was something else, but definitely, not surprisingly, published first in Germany. It's basically a compendium of literature in demonology of the 15th century. The top theologians of the Inquisition and the faculty of Cologne condemned this book as recommending unethical and illegal procedures. So even the Catholic Church recognized that this was inconsistent with the Catholic doctrines of demonology, yet still, during the witch trial craze or crazes, this was a book that was cited again and again and again to prove malfeasance, to prove maleficence, witchcraft, covenants with the devil. Did you hear what I just said? The number one, so let me just, before we get into etymology, one of the things outlined, so this is kind of like a two-parter thing, how to identify a witch and how to cure her, or basically exorcise, or basically torture, torment, and execute a witch. That's really what we were getting at. And as now, not so much an attack on witchcraft as an attack on women. Very few males persecuted in this, at any rate, or during the span of this. Not to say that it didn't happen. I'm giving a shout out, full respect. What I will say here is that one of the things that it pointed to as, like, if you're looking, if you're wondering if your female friend, wife, lover, daughter, whatever, happens to be a witch, does she disappear? So there was this whole idea that witches disappeared during the full moons, and they would congregate and they would consort with the devil and they would have sexual relations, and in fact they would have wild, unabandoned, wanton, lustful sex and orgies. It was just really the epitome of lust and debauchery, right? Sodomy galore, ass fucking. I have a few children listening to this, actually. I don't know. Sorry, sodomy, as far as the eye can see, is that somehow better? Trying to reel it in, but I'm having a hard time censoring myself, because really what they were saying was they'd go on the full moons, they'd meet on hilltops and mountaintops, and they would consort with the devil. And this charge, when, I would say if proven, but it was always proven, because how the fuck do you dispute it? This was known as, you would be found as guilty with covenants with the devil. There you go. Coven, root word etymology. There you go. So while the word coven and this idea of a coven, the idea of a coven is presented in the Malleus Maleficarum. However, they don't necessarily use that word. Well, they don't use that. As far as I know, if somebody out there has read it back to back and wants to school me on it, go for it. I would actually really like to hear it. What I can say from here, this concept of a coven has become a very in popular culture, as I like to say. No, but in pop culture, it's very much a trope within movies, and specifically within Suspiria. We have, as discussed, this idea that we have this Greek coven mastress, head of the coven, and to really eliminate the coven, all you have to do is cut the head off of the snake. Is that how that's? I don't. Is that? Is that cut the head off the snake? Is that? I'm thinking of Medusa. Cut the head off. Anyway, you know what I mean. You cut off the head, the whole thing dies. The body dies, right? So you kill the coven mastress. Oh, sorry. That was a weird sound. And just scratched the microphone. That might have been alarming. Or you might have gotten off on it. Either way, yeah, destroy the coven master and you destroy the coven. They lose power because they draw power from the master, right? So this whole idea really, now here, you might be tempted as I was to go to Wikipedia. I say don't. Hey, for an overview, it is what it is. But this, I'm actually really surprised because there's a lot of information on Wikipedia about paganism and Wicca and other things. And fuck, even like Thelema, Crowley, Satanic Church, Temple of... Wikipedia is actually pretty well versed on the occult and esoteric practices, as it turns out, pretty accurately from at a glance from what I've done so far. However, girl, the entry on Coven leaves a lot to be desired. It's poorly cited. It does reference neo-paganism, but in the strangest way possible. They do mention drawing down the moon and the Sabbats, but it's just not cited at any turn, and I'm surprised that it hasn't been flagged. I'm also equally surprised that it hasn't been fixed. Come on, witches, why ain't you fixing this? You are out there, you're paying attention. You're fucking paying attention to all of my mistakes. Yeah. All right. No, actually, nobody's really called me out on shit. I know you guys notice when I fuck up, but nobody's being a dick about it, and I appreciate that. I really do. But what I can say seems to be the phrase of the night. Wikipedia's main contribution to the further studies. Do they even mention her? Oh, they do mention Margaret Murray. So now we're back to Margaret Murray, who is this Anglo-Indian Egyptologist, archaeologist, anthropologist, historian, and folklorist. Here's the thing. This seems like an incredibly... It's a sexy, holistic, combining and commingling of things that seem to naturally kind of abet one another. Of course, archaeology goes with history. It would make sense to be an archaeologist and an anthropologist. Why wouldn't you want to know the physical and the fucking cultural? And by the way, all of that is history, so historian. And folklore. Let's talk about this for a minute. At a glance, you might say, and folklorist. Well, wait, all this legit shit, and then it gets kind of wishy-washy, pseudoscience-y. But the thing about folklore, it has defined us. It absolutely has. It predates religion. It predates any kind of city, statehood, control, ownership of or centralized power, right? Controlling the decentralized masses. It predates even a lot of patriarchy, when there was no idea of, when there wasn't a power, like a well-recognized seat of power to be imbalanced, right? There had to be power before there was a differential, before there was an imbalance of power. And I feel like a lot of folklore, this is a generalized statement, pick me apart, but I feel like it's a natural evolution and kind of a holistic, very well-rounded approach at this getting to the truth, getting at the truth. What were the predominant cultures at the time? Were they goddess worshipping almost assuredly? Was there a pantheon of gods or goddesses? Also, almost assuredly. So, looking at those artifacts and the things and the cultural norms that one would find associated with any given time period, I don't think it can be divorced from certain spiritual practices and folklore being not, I mean, there was no doctrine, there was no indoctrination or doctrine to folklore. It was kind of just the way things were done, right? A lot of times. So, not as many restrictive rules and just kind of like, hey, so that tree is a sentient being. I'm casting a really wide net. But folklore essentially served to explain things unexplainable, previously unexplainable. That's why a lot of animism was used, anthropomorphism, right? So looking at a tree and describing it as a he or a she, attributing personality and characteristics to it. That was how we understood, because I was there, I'm a vampire. That's how people understood the world in which they lived without scientific evidence and proof and empirical studies. What was observable must have been a fucking trip, especially considering there were probably a lot of hallucinogens, even sometimes unwittingly. The rye would mold and that would create, or whatever it was, I don't know if rye, wheat, whatever, or mushrooms, like, hey, it looks like food, it might kill you, you might trip your ass off. Things like that. And anyway, I can go off, I'm getting very Terence McKenna here on it. Point being that this was a fucking hell of a tangent. She did really come up. What's really cool about Murray is she was closely involved in first wave feminism. First wave, joining the Women's Social and Political Union, Women's Social and Political Union, and devoting a lot of time to improving women's status in general. She was really kind of well, here, let me read this part directly from Wikipedia. This lady fascinates the fuck out of me. She focused her research on the witch cult hypothesis, the theory that the witch trials of early modern Christendom were an attempt to extinguish a surviving pre-Christian pagan religion devoted to a horned god. Now, the horned god that she's talking about here could be any of many, but that theory is sound. When you usurp one religion, and this is what Christianity did, we could look at Christianity as a great bastardization of all of the pre-existing goddess religion, or earth-based goddess religions. It borrowed from a lot of different things. I've talked about this quite a few, and I've already been off on a few tangents, but Christianity bastardized. It was a great bastard. It took from everything. It took bits and pieces, but most of all, borrowed so fucking heavily. Heavenly would have been an interesting malapropism. It borrowed so heavily from paganism, to be totally honest. It was very much the goddess culture. So a lot of things, Samhain turned into Halloween, and the solstices, and whether you saw it as a winter solstice or whether you saw it as cool, or anyway, any of these things, the Christmas tree, pretty much every holiday that we still observe in Christendom has some symbolic tie to paganism. That's just fact. I feel like a real pundit right now. But anyway, her idea that the witch trials were really an attempt to extinguish this pre-Christian pagan religion. Absolutely. You come in, you steal, you you borrow and steal away from the pre-existing cultures, you have to eradicate them, or people are always going to remember that you're a bastard. You're bastardizing the whole thing. They really had to try to eradicate it. Now, as it stood, they could not. Hail Satan. Boy, I'm on fire tonight. This is going to be okay. I was actually trying to rule it in. She was a fascinating person. Here's what I will say about her. She was born in Bengal, Calcutta. I will say Margaret Murray was a very interesting woman who really was a true feminist, a true scholar. And so Murray pretty much, here's what we're getting at. She pretty much single-handedly, she was pretty much the progenitor of this idea of the coven as we understand it still to this day in neo-paganism and all of its offshoots, in Wicca and everything that you might be familiar with today, and even in all of those delicious movie tropes such as the one found in our beautiful movie Suspiria. But I have to say, I probably could have done, this was one of those beautiful, I was, discovering it as I was down the rabbit hole, that really I could have done an entire episode just on her, just on Margaret Murray, because honestly, what happened was, although she did not gain recognition really as an archaeologist, she was kind of usurped by her male counterpart. Big fucking surprise. Fuck the patriarchy. But her work as a first wave feminist, and then as a defining this whole archetype really of Coventry. How that happened was she actually wrote a paper, and this was in 1917. She published a paper in Folklore. It was a journal of folklore society. And this is where she first really talked about the witch cult theory, arguing that witches persecuted in European history were actually followers of, and I'm reading quotes here from Wikipedia, a definite religion with beliefs, ritual, and organization as highly developed as that of any cult in the end. Because of this, she was actually in the Scottish Historical Review. She got a positive review by Henry Balfour. There was some criticism in the witch cult in Western Europe. The book that she wrote, the book was titled The Witch Cult in Western Europe. That was published in 21. That's the one that got a positive peer review. Sorry for the confusion. But it did receive some criticism. Nonetheless, to this day remains an influential work. So, fucking props to you, Mother Maiden and Crone. I love this woman. As a result of all of this work, there were other reviews in academic journals, but she was invited to provide the entry on witchcraft for the 14th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1929, which, if you remember, is where I embarked on this whole journey. She used that opportunity to really keep going about her witch cult theory. She did ignore some other alternate theories proposed by other academics, but so what, we all do. Her entry was actually included there, was the only entry until 1969. So for a good 40 years, that was it. She was the authority, which I think is fucking cool. Because really that usually happens to men. Really, women don't usually get that accolade or that distinction or that kind of like credence, really. She joined what was the actual name of it? The Occult Society. Sorry, no, that's my bad. She joined the Folklore Society, which was a thing. A lot of this I had never even heard of. So anyway, she joined the Folklore Society in February of 1927, which was aimed at a wider non-academic audience. So in this, according to the Wikipedia page, in this book, she cut out or toned down what she saw as the more unpleasant aspects of witchcraft, such as animal sacrifice, child sacrifice, and she started describing it in more positive terms. One of the positive terms that she coined is the old religion, which is pretty fucking accurate. So I have to say, all and all, pound for pound, this was a really beautiful find on my part. It's something that I'm a little bit surprised that I wasn't previously familiar with, but here you go. We learn every day, people. You keep living to learn another day. although I went so far down the rabbit hole with Murray, I did not do a lot of other studying on the roots or other possible kind of points of origin or whatever of points of origin is fine of this idea of the coven. But honestly, I think I found the holy grail of it right here. We got a slight nod to the Malleus Maleficarum, of course. So where a lot of this originated, the ideas, but this whole idea of a coven specifically, given props up to Margaret Murray. Listen, here's what I want to say. I've had a pleasure doing this episode. I love this film. I love everything I found out about Margaret and Alice Murray. Margaret Alice, not Anne. Margaret Alice Murray. I love all of the weird anomalies and bizarre little tie-ins to like different. Our three maidens in the show or in the movie, the actresses this time had some stories. There were some, we had a sex cult, a virgin death, some different things happening. A love triangle that ended with a shooting, ending here with Margaret Murray, the progenitor of this idea of the coven, which I love. I think this is a fantastic place to end. I'll tell you what, I haven't quite made a decision about next week's or the next episode. It won't be in a week. It might be in two. I have to check the calendar where I'm up. But yeah, okay. So we're trying to do bi-monthly or two a month. That would be bi-monthly, right? I think so. Kind of going back and forth between Melancholia by Lars von Trier and Hour of the Wolf by Ingmar Bergman. So if you have any thoughts that you would like to express about that, please do hit me up here in the comments, like and subscribe if you want to. I really don't give a fuck. Follow me on Wikipedia, because I'm looking at Wikipedia. Follow me on my webpage, which is Maidens and Magick. That is at anarchy.me, A-N-E-R-Key, K-E-Y, A-N-E-R-K-E-Y.me, anarchy.me, Maidens and Magick, also on Facebook. Follow me there, and I will keep you updated. Let me know what you think about next week. Let me know what you think about life in general. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts. But most of all, my friends, my witches, do please, just above everything else, stay witchy.